So we're going to finish up chapter 2. Like I said, most of you's probably already got this done. But we're talking about the ratification of the Constitution. So basically we've got to the point to where you guys have seen the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan and all that stuff, right? Did y'all understand all that? Do we need to review it? Has everybody got it? Because that's going to be a big important part of the test. Virginia plan, New Jersey plan, Great Compromise, the 3/5 Compromise, and the Slave Trade Compromise. Does anybody have any questions about that? All right. So we've now decided that we've written this Constitution and we've got to figure out exactly who likes it. So with this section, we're going to talk about the opposing sides. You guys, I'm sure you've seen Federalists and Anti-Federalists before. And then basically we're going to describe how the new government works. So this is fairly simple. Pretty easy stuff. So at the top of your paper there, it says what were the two positions of each side toward ratification. You had the Federalist and you had the Anti-Federalist. You should have written beside the Federalist that those were the ones that favored the Constitution just the way that it was. And then the Anti-Federalists were the people that opposed ratification. So Federalists wanted it approved just like it is. And then the Anti-Federalists wanted a couple of things added to it before they wanted to approve it. But you have people on opposite sides of this, and you're going to have a lot of bickering and battling back and forth about why they should or shouldn't ratify this. Okay? So, Federalists, again, wanted it ratified. Anti-Federalists opposed it. They did not want it ratified. Okay? So, what were the issues that surrounded the ratification of the Constitution? Now, if you look at number 2 on your paper here, it gives you a list of A through E, right? In these issues, and let me find them on the board so you can actually look at them. Yeah. They don't list them all in the notes, so if you didn't get them, I'm going to read them to you. So there were basically 5 major issues involved with the ratification process. The most important one, or the one that we're going to spend the most time on, I would like for you to put a lack of Bill of Rights. Did you guys get that part in the notes? So in letter A, I would write down a lack of Bill of Rights. Now, I probably gave it to you in a certain order, which is fine. I don't really care how you get them in order, but I just want you to know a lack of Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments were not added to the Constitution. The Federalists thought that we didn't need to add it to the Constitution because it was already written in state government or state constitutions. So why add it? Anti-Federalists opposed that idea because they're looking at it like if we don't put civil liberties and freedoms in the Constitution, that eventually it would be forgotten. Okay? So they were very adamant about having the 10 amendments. So the first 10 amendments. So the lack of a Bill of Rights. The next issue that you guys should have put down was it was the weakness of the national government while we were under the Articles of Confederation. Okay? And it's up there. It says, how strong should the new central government be to avoid problems faced under the Articles? The reason we had problems is because we had a weak central government. So the question being asked is how strong should the new national government be under the Constitution? You guys got to remember, we broke away from a country that the national government controlled a lot of things. So the last thing that we wanted was a government that was going to try to control us. So the big issue here was, how are we going to ratify it? Okay? Yeah, or how, well, you can put it, because of the weakness of the Articles, how strong is the new national government going to be? Does that make sense? People are arguing on how much power it should have. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. So you should have 2 of these so far. And again, I don't know how many of them you have from the notes from yesterday, but you should have lack of a Bill of Rights and then the strength of the national government. Those are 2 of the biggest issues about the ratification of the Constitution. Okay? The next one there, letter C, you can put down the ratification process itself. Like, if you guys remember, ratification means to approve. When we were under the Articles, you could only fix the Articles if all 13 colonies or all 13 states agreed to do it. With the Constitution, it is suggesting that only 9 of the 13 states have to agree to change it. So that was an issue for some people. Some people thought that all 13 states should have to agree. Others said 9 out of 13 is fine. Okay? So the ratification process, that could also be a problem. Everybody with me so far? All right, the next one, and this one, I don't know if it said anything in your notes, but there was no mention of God in the Constitution, and that bothered people. You got to think about it. We break away from a country, and the majority of people that came here for religious freedom, right? And we're writing our government, and there's no mention of God or anything religious about it, okay? So that rubbed people the wrong way. So the absence of the mention of God. And then the last one, which is not very significant now, but it was at the time, was that the states no longer had the right to print money, okay? Under the Articles of Confederation, states were allowed to print money, and that was one of the problems that it had, okay? Now the national government's going to do all of it, and the states are kind of like, well, we kind of like the idea of printing our own money. So just to recap that, so you guys have it, the 5 issues that involved ratification, the first one being a lack of Bill of Rights, because that's the one we're going to spend the majority of our time on today. The second one was how strong would the national government be. The ratification process is the third one. The fourth one being there's no mention of God. And then lastly, denying the states the right to print money. Has everybody got those? All right. Now, as we get into this, I know that you guys didn't put this part down, okay? So we're actually going to jump back up to number 1, and we're just going to fill in a couple things. Then we're going to jump down to the bottom of the paper, okay? So, if you look back at number 1 where it says Federalist, we want to have an idea of what they were thinking, okay? So, supporters of the ratification or the approval of the Constitution were called Federalists. You've already put that part down. But they also said that they argued that the Articles of Confederation were too weak and needed to be replaced. So, beside the Federalists, put down that the Articles needed to be replaced. They were all for removing the Articles of Confederation. So, knowing that, and knowing what you know about the Articles of Confederation, since the Articles made the national government weak, and the Federalists want to remove the Articles of Confederation, what type of national government do they want? A strong one, right? So beside the Federalists, you can put down removal of the Articles, and they want a strong national government. Okay? And then it says that Alexander Hamilton was a leader among the Federalists. If you look down at the bottom of your paper in number 6, 7, and 8, it's asking you to tell me what those people are, whether they're Federalists or Anti-Federalists. So you can go ahead beside of Alexander Hamilton and write the letter F. Okay? You can also put the letter F beside of James Madison. He shows up here in a minute, but I don't want to keep going back and forth to that. And then Patrick Henry was an Anti-Federalist. So you should have F-A-F down at the bottom of the paper. Okay? And I'm not necessarily going to ask you who's who. I just want you to know what they did. Okay? Like what the Federalists did, what the Anti-Federalists did. So again, Federalists were in approval of the Constitution. They wanted to remove the Articles completely, and they wanted a stronger national government. Now, on the flip side of that, you have the Anti-Federalists who obviously opposed the ratification. Okay? Put down beside of them that they thought the new national government would be too strong. So they didn't want a strong national government. So they thought the new national government would be too strong, basically have too much power, and eventually try to just control everything. All right? And then lastly, they put down what's in red up there on the board, that there was a need for a Bill of Rights. The Anti-Federalists were all about our civil rights and our civil liberties to be written in the Constitution. So they wanted or needed a Bill of Rights. Okay? Is everybody with me so far? Pretty simple stuff. It's stuff you've heard, I'm sure, multiple times. All right, now, here's the cool thing about history. We have the ability to have hindsight, which we know what already happened, right? So, does the United States Constitution have a Bill of Rights in it? Yes, it does. Now, obviously, there was some bickering and conflict and discussion and compromise to be had to get that added to the U.S. Constitution, but we ultimately got to do it, okay? Now, you guys also have the ability to know we started to ratify the Constitution in what year? Does anybody remember? So in 1788, it says New Hampshire became the 9th ratifying state. Y'all with me? We started the ratification process in 1787. Now, you don't have to write any of this down yet. I'll tell you what you need to write down. So it took us roughly a year to get it ratified. So New Hampshire became the 9th state to do it, which was 1788. Do any of you know, the reason I say that, do any of you know when the Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution? Do you think it happened in 1788? No, it actually happened in 1791. The first 10 were added in 1791. Now there's a reason that I bring that up that makes it important. If the Anti-Federalists had have gotten their way originally, and we had just put in the first 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights, and then everybody signed and agreed to the Constitution, there would be no way to amend it. You guys understand what amend means? To change. By adding the Bill of Rights at a later date, it set up the ability to amend the Constitution. Do any of you know how many amendments we've added to the Constitution? There's 27 of them. The first 10 all at one time, and then the last 17 over a period of time. The 27th Amendment was added in 2003, and we'll go through how all that works at a later date about the ratification process. But here's the cool thing about it. The 28th Amendment could be being discussed right now, and we wouldn't know anything about it until it's actually approved. You guys with me? And that amendment could have been written in 2005 or 6 or whatever. The last one that was actually added was written in 2000 or approved in 2003. So the amendment process could take a very long time. But the idea is we have a way to change it. Okay? So the next part of this, in number 3, it kind of skips a lot of information here. So we're going to add some stuff to this, okay? You can put this at the bottom. You can write it down on your own notebook, paper. It doesn't really matter to me, but there are a couple of key ideas that are left out in these notes that I want you to know, okay? So why is there such a big fuss over the Bill of Rights, okay? I think I've already alluded to this a second ago, but it says Federalists said that the Bill of Rights was not needed because their biggest argument was that state constitutions already protected individual rights and freedoms. Their idea was, why do we have to write this again? Because each state has already put in their constitution our individual rights and our individual liberties. Okay? It says separation of power among the 3 branches would keep the new national government from abusing its authority. So they're saying, listen, we're separating power so the national government can't get too strong. That was the arguments for the Federalists. But the biggest thing about the Bill of Rights was they were thinking, it's already been written down. Why do we got to do it again? Okay? So, but the Anti-Federalists were adamant about this. They're like, listen, we're not going to sign this document. We're not going to approve this document until a Bill of Rights has been added. So obviously there's some bickering back and forth. Okay? So, how do they bicker and how are they getting people to think about the Constitution? Here's where you need to jot this down because this is not on your paper. And you can create a text box at the bottom or to the side or whatever you need to do. But this is important, okay? Now you guys got to remember, the only way to communicate during this time, in the late 1700s, there's no cell phones, there's no telephones, I don't even think there's radio yet. There's no computer. The only way to communicate with one another is through newspapers, and if I wanted to directly speak to you and you lived 2 states away, what would I have to write you? I would have to write you a letter. So, Federalists and Anti-Federalists start using newspapers to try to get their point across on what they're doing, because colonial people are avid readers. That's what they have. Okay, even during British occupation of the colonies, we were avid readers. That's how people in Virginia found out about the Boston Massacre. You know what I mean? So everybody likes to read. So in your text box, I would like you to write down Federalist Papers. Okay? Federalist Papers. Now, it's giving you a couple names here. It says that the Federalist Papers were written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. I don't really care if you know that. We've already labeled them at the bottom there, so that's okay. Okay? But I want you to know what their pen name was. These three individuals wrote the Federalist Papers, but they wrote under the name Publius. You guys see that in the first little part there? The P-U-B-I-L-I-U-S? Write that down. Put down pen name Publius. Now, the reason they didn't use their actual name, I'm not really sure. I guess it was just because all three of them were writing them, and instead of just having to sign off on them all the time, they chose the pen name Publius to try to get their point across. So the Federalist Papers were written by those three individuals who wrote under the pen name Publius, okay? Next idea, it says they consisted of 85 essays that were written between 1787 and 1788 and were published across the nation. I need you to know that there were 85 of them, okay? So put down 85 essays, all right? And basically what these essays were attempting to do was to try to get the states to agree that we didn't need to add a Bill of Rights and that the national government would not be too strong. That was the Federalist approach. We're trying to get all these people to agree with us, okay? So they wrote the Federalist Papers, which were circulated through the states so everybody could read them. Now, common sense. Who else is going to see these papers if they're publishing them in newspapers? The anti-federalists as well, right? So what is their response going to be? Very simple. Guess what they're also going to do? They're going to write letters, okay? Or essays that they're going to get put in newspapers. So underneath the same text box, write down anti-federalist, and their pen name is Brutus, okay? It says that most of them were written by a guy named Robert Yates. I'm not really worried about you remembering names. But anyway, every day when the paper comes out, you get a Federalist and you get an anti-Federalist point of view on what our Constitution should look like. So obviously there's going to be a lot of debate and a lot of confusion on what people think would be the best course of action. All right? So at the bottom of your notes there it says, around the country, debate over ratification was fed by various written works expressing strong views on both sides. So obviously you got people that's going to agree more so with one side than the other. So you're going to have debates. Now, as we get into the ratification process, you're going to notice that it's going to be swift in some states and then some people aren't going to like it. So it says ratification was swift in some states and bitterly contested in others. It says approval of the Constitution required ratification of 9 states. I need you to jot that down as well. That's not on your notes. But to approve the Constitution, 9 of the 13 states had to agree to it. Okay. Now the notes say that in June of 1788, New Hampshire became the 9th ratifying state. So, according to the law or the rules of the Constitutional Convention, where 9 of the 13 states have to agree to the idea that this is the Constitution or the rule of government we want, should the Constitution be approved at this point? Yes. But there's a stick. There's a hold up here. Okay? The hold up is this. If you guys will look on your notes at number 3, it says, on what 2 states did the success or failure of ratification depend? Of the 9 states that have ratified up to this point in June of 1988, 2 of them, which has the largest populations of people, have yet to make a vote. So of the 9 states that have already said, yeah, we like this idea, they don't have a lot of people living in them, so people were scared that if Virginia and New York didn't approve our Constitution, that it would ultimately fail. And the reason being is population. There's a ton of people in New York, there's a ton of people in Virginia, okay? So neither one of them has cast an idea of what they want to do yet. So it's kind of hinging, even though we've got 9 approvals, it's still kind of hinging on what we want to do. Okay? So this next part basically goes through in Virginia how the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists are arguing back and forth. Same thing in New York. Okay? So it says, when Virginia and New York finally ratified the Constitution by narrow votes, success was finally ensured. So they both approve it. So now 11 of the 13 are saying, yeah, we need this. Now, again, has the Bill of Rights been added to the Constitution at this point? No. So what's been approved is the Federalist idea of how the Constitution should be ran. Does everybody understand that? The little chart I'm showing you there in your notes, it just gives you the dates of when everybody decided they would do it. If you notice, Virginia and New York, very slim margins, okay? But nonetheless, we get the Constitution. But here's the kicker with it. In Virginia and in New York, it was decided that the Bill of Rights would be added at a later date if they would just simply approve it. You guys understand that? So basically, they made a deal. Like, if you'll go ahead and approve the Constitution so we can have a form of government, then we will add the Bill of Rights at a later date, which we do because we ratified it. Everybody ratified it by 1790, and I told you that the Bill of Rights was added in what year? 1791, right? So it eventually got to it, but it took all 13 states to eventually agree. All right? And then as far as the rest of this goes, in number 4 and number 5, you know, we get our Constitution, obviously. It says the Confederation chose New York City as a temporary capital. That is number 4. It says, where was the first national capital located? I think I used that as like a bonus question. It's not Richmond. It was New York City, okay? And then it says the U.S. Congress first met in New York City in 1789. Okay, the next 2 questions you guys probably already know. It says that George Washington was chosen as the first president, which is part A of number 5. The reason he was chosen was because of his success during the Revolutionary War. And then his vice president was a guy by the name of John Adams. Okay, so now we have our U.S. Constitution, which is still in effect to this day. September 10th, 2020. Okay? Does anybody have any questions about the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists and how they work? Hopefully you had the majority of that. I just helped you add on to it, right? Okay. Now,